So, yes, today we are responding to what I can really only call George Galloway's Council of Ghouls. Because George Galloway, again, we all know about George Galloway's time on Russia Today, the pretty much Kremlin controlled and essentially propaganda outlet. And the program that George is on here, after all, he's now should we say, been banished from Russia Today, or should we say, he's a bit worried about going on and being branded a collaborator and maybe losing, those precious money monies that he used to get from Russia Today after all this war. He can just go straight back to being on Russia Today again and start, towing the line on Russians and Putin's propaganda all he wants. So instead, he's now got to find a new outlet for it. And of course, he goes on what is this called? The Almudden network. And for those of you wondering or maybe interested in looking it up, you will not be too surprised to find that this is an Assad Syria state sponsored not Russian TV network, Syrian TV network that is basically very, very pro Assad. And of course, in this situation, Assad is very pro-Russia, which means he's anti-Ukrainian, which basically means George Galloway gets to what he would normally do on, say, Russia Today, gets to do it on here, but doesn't get to be, shall we say, branded a propagandist, or shall we say, paid propagandist by YouTube or Twitter or anyone potentially else, but he still gets to, shall we say, mow out his bad takes. But it gets even more funnier because the full version of this we'll be looking at on Wednesday. Yes, we'll be going over the full absolute disaster and bizarre narratives that Galloway and his Council of Ghouls likes to put out. So look forward to that on Wednesday. It will be the announcement will be going up just in a bit after I've done this video, but it will probably already be up by the time this video comes out. So without further ado, let's dive into George Galloway's counsel, because he's going to pose a question. And you'd think that if you're having a discussion around Ukraine, maybe you'd get people who would at least be familiar with what's going on in Ukraine. No, instead, one of the people on his council, and don't worry, we'll get very, very well associated with the rest of them on Wednesday. Don't you worry. He's a expert on China. For some reason, you bring an expert on China into a program which lasts roughly about an hour to talk about Ukraine. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make a bit of sense at all. But anyway, here we go. So let's see what George and his quote China expert have to say about Ukraine. And yet it's worth pointing out that Trump didn't actually do that. He didn't withdraw any troops really from the Middle East. He certainly didn't draw any from Iraq. He certainly didn't withdraw from Afghanistan. Indeed, that was Biden. No, they're not liberals. I am not a liberal, George. I am very firmly on the left. The reason why most of these quote people are coming from the right is because they are authoritarians who see no problem with the might makes right argument and basically just say, well, Ukraine might be a democratic country, but well, Russia wants to take it over. So whoopsie doopsie, guess Russia gets a free Ukraine. That's not how the international world order should work. It's not how we should want to live in that world of just might makes right. But Galloway will pretend that those people are in the right and that they are saying all the right things. Well, he still gets to dine out, of course, on the fact that he was the only MP who opposed the Iraq War. There were many other MPs out there who opposed the Iraq War, but Galloway just likes to make pretend, of course, that he was the only brave one out there. What a brave boy he was. So let's see where else this ridiculous argument goes. No one, by the way, to understand what a no-fly zone is, a no-fly zone would essentially really mean potentially kickstarting World War III. Now, I understand the reason why Zelensky wants one, but ultimately the practical nature of it would essentially lead to a far greater war of escalation because we've seen the Russians in particular have incredibly bad trigger discipline. Um, so who's to say that a Russian military officer doesn't fire off a rocket and hit a US plane or any other potential NATO allied plane? The potential escalation is there. So arguing for a no-fly zone has always been and come from very much Zelensky saying, please give us a no-fly zone, which is understandable as to why he wants one. But I haven't seen anyone really on the left argue for that position because that's the outcome. But again, Galloway will say, oh, it's the left. All these left calling for this warmonger attitude. But of course, he now turns to his expert on China to talk about Ukraine. So let's hear his response to this. How? How? He's basically saying we should support Ukraine. And Keir Starmer has also said a no-fly zone is a bad idea. Again, supplying weapons that we have done and the support that we actually have provided to Ukraine has been absolutely a fantastic move. It's the right thing to do internationally in this situation to help support Ukraine. And it's shockingly probably one of the other very few things you can actually say that Boris Johnson got right. And it must be said again, as we've been over what that Stop the War coalition wanted, the Stop the War coalition essentially basically said, we condemn Russia for its invasion, but they should probably get Ukraine. that that wouldn't have stopped the war. That was just appeasement. And that was an incredibly bad take by those MPs and the Stop the War coalition by pushing for that. And and again, America has not declared war on Russia. It has provided, again, material for the Ukrainians to use, hasn't exactly declared war on Russia. So again, mischaracterizing the entire situation well and truly completely. And I want to point this out: is Russia not doing what it is doing imperialist? Proof correct over what? Over what? Yeah, I know. While our country's at war, let's have a socialist uprising. You know, the conditions were perfect for it in Russia at the time, where again Lenin was sort of able to take over because again Russia was pretty much a powder keg that had literally been before World War One. I think it was like 3 attempts at revolution, but because of the number of, shall we say, the people that they armed at the front, they were just like, right, we're not going to take it anymore. And obviously, rather than, shall we say, it be civilians that led this, it was ultimately led really by sort of navy in St. Petersburg, and then of course parts of the army followed suit. But the situations were not the same, um, in these other countries. They were completely different. So just what unless he's advocating that the left should be rising up now to fight against Russia invading Ukraine because we are providing arms to Ukraine. That doesn't make any sense. Yes, because the Gaddafi regime was a bastion of liberal left values. Again, so yeah, and that is just an example, by the way, of the full hour conversation. Basically, every single time, it's as we've said when we've covered George Galloway, it devolves into, oh, but what about this? What about that? And it's like, no, what about what's going on in Ukraine right now? The fact that we have clear evidence of Russia committing war crimes with the amount of civilian bodies that they are finding. And yet, George Galloway has not only had guests, and he himself, as we discussed last week on the live stream, oh, this is just Russia's civilized way of waging war. And even George Galloway, just a couple of weeks ago, we covered him saying, "Oh, fuff, all this, nonsense. You don't understand. Russia is waging a gentlemanly war. It's waging it with one hand tied behind its back. If only, it's holding back. It's doing it gently. This is gently as possible. It's capturing Ukrainian soldiers, not butchering them." Um, yeah, Galloway at this point, there's no other way to say it. He's a Putin shill. What else? What else do you want me to say at this point? And I think that proves my point. So if you want to see us come and cover, shall we say, the full hour of this Council of Ghouls, it's the only way to describe it. Come along on Wednesday, and we'll have some fun. But needless to say, yeah. Get ready, because it is, if you thought that was bad what he had to say there, gets kind of a lot worse in the full thing. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.